Hello, my name is Goat, and a few days ago I went live on Twitch with the intention of beating Dark Souls 3 using only shields. This ended up being a lot more difficult than I anticipated, taking a little over 7 hours to get through the game. I would rank it as harder than a broken sword run, but still not as hard as Soul Level 1. In this video, I'm going to show you how the run was done and give some tips for how you can do one of your own as well. For my starting class, I decided to pick Warrior. This was primarily for their high starting HP and stamina, which were the two stats I wanted to focus on the most. This class also starts with the round shield, which I actually ended up using for the entire playthrough. It's not a bad pick, as it deals a pretty standard amount of damage when compared to most shields in the same size group. And since it's starting equipment, that meant we could get it upgraded pretty quickly. The Kite Shield is also a decent choice, as it deals slightly more damage. It also has really good physical damage reduction, which would be nice, but chances are you won't be using your shield to block that often anyway. A lot of bosses in this game will still deal chip damage regardless. Bosses like Phase 2 Abyss Watchers, High Lord Wolnir, Pontiff Sulyvahn, Phase 2 Yhorm, Dancer, Dragonslayer Armour, basically every boss that deals some form of non-physical damage. Not to mention, blocking absolutely tears through your stamina, so unless you plan on having a high stability great shield in your offhand, I'd just stick to dodging and parrying. Anyway, let's get into the actual run now, starting with boss number 1. Iudex Gundyr was a pretty simple affair. After removing the sword from his chest, you get 3 hits for free. Then at that point, you'll want to hang back and let your stamina regenerate. His first phase consists of many attacks that are fairly easy to parry. Doing so will award you with 2 free hits, the first of which will register as a counter hit, meaning you'll get some bonus damage. Stay at a medium to close range so you can bait an attack, parry, hit twice, rinse and repeat until phase 2. Once he transforms, you're going to want to stick close and only go for a hit after dodging one of Gundyr's attacks. Your stamina consumption with each shield hit is going to be extremely high, so be patient and wait for your opportunity to strike. It's basically rule number 1 of Dark Souls: don't get greedy. If you're two-handing your weapon, he'll be staggered once every 4 hits, so either get in some extra damage or take the time to regenerate your stamina. If you can do all this, Gundyr won't be a problem. Immediately following this fight, I went over here to perform the tree jump, a little skip that allows us to get an early Estus shard as well as the covetous silver serpent ring. Then I leveled up my HP, allotted my flasks, and jumped straight into the high wall of Lothric. While I was running through this area, I made sure to grab all the titanite shards I could, as well as the raw gem from this crystal lizard. I plan to use this to infuse my shield with raw damage, which would give me a much needed boost in DPS. Some people might suggest infusing your shield with a heavy gem and leveling strength, but in my opinion, you get a lot more mileage out of simply having more health to work with. When you're doing a run like this, your damage will objectively be very low no matter what you do, so each boss fight will essentially become an endurance test. The more health you have, the longer you survive, and we see this coming into play as early as the next boss. The first thing you'll probably notice when taking on Vordt is your damage. It's incredibly bad. Because of this, you're gonna want to stick as close to him as possible. I recommend trying to stay behind him in both phases, that way you can avoid his hammer attacks while still getting in hits of your own. Once phase 2 starts, he's gonna do this multi-part charge attack, but if you rush him immediately following the final charge, you can get in a bunch of free damage. Then afterwards, it's pretty much the same as phase 1, just stay behind him as much as you can. Going underneath him might also be effective, but be wary that he can still hit you from there, and if he's in phase 2, he'll inflict frostbite as well. Overall, Vordt's not too bad. He goes down fairly easily, allowing us to move on to the next area. Just like with High Wall, I made sure to pick up as many titanite shards as possible. I also picked up Flynn's ring, which grants a slight damage increase, as well as the Chloranthy ring for faster stamina regeneration. It's important to note that you'll only benefit from Flynn's ring so long as your equipment load is low, hence why I'm naked and only have my shield equipped. Afterwards, I moved on to the Road of Sacrifices. While you're here, I recommend grabbing the Grass Crest shield. This item will passively increase your stamina regeneration so long as you have it equipped in one hand. I didn't didn't do this until much later as I wanted a higher benefit from flinzering, but in hindsight, it's more useful to have it than to not. There's also an item in Fair and Keep that may make this run a little easier, the Stone Parma. It requires 17 strength to wield, so depending on your starting class, you might need to invest some souls to use it. This specific shield has the highest attack rating out of every medium-sized shield, which makes it a very decent candidate for this challenge. I decided to stick with the round shield as it can parry and it's much lighter. You may notice that for parts of this section, I have the Twin Dragon Great Shield equipped. I was testing to see how effective it would be for blocking, since it's one of the earliest Great Shields the player can acquire. I personally didn't find it to be very useful, so it didn't take long for me to unequip it. After lighting the 3 fires, I went up this tower and broke this illusory wall for the Dream Chaser's ashes. This ash gives access to purchasable Titanite shards, which will boost us to a +3 shield. If you can't afford the extra Titanite shards, come up here and kill the Stray Demon for a quick 25,000 souls. Then, if you go to the other side of the bridge through this hidden walkway, you can also get 2 large Titanite shards from these crystal lizards, giving you a +4. I knew I was going to need this, as the next boss I planned on doing was the Abyss Watchers. They weren't going to be a pushover, so I made sure my shield was doing as much damage as it could. Okay, this is gonna be tough. In fact, when I was streaming this run, this boss took me almost 40 minutes of attempts. But I think I've devised a pretty good strategy for beating them. In this fight, you're gonna want to play very passively. Keep your distance so you can avoid dodging too much and potentially getting hit. Be on the lookout for attacks with a lot of downtime that you can safely punish. Just keep in mind that shield attacks are incredibly slow, so don't try to do more than one. If you do, you'll more than likely get punished for it. If you stay too close, the boss will most likely swipe at you with his dagger, which is why after getting your hit in, you should immediately dodge away. At about 20 seconds into the fight, another Abyss Watcher will spawn, sharing the same moveset as the first. I recommend taking this one out as soon as possible, as after 20 more seconds, another Watcher will spawn that will actually attack the boss itself. It can still hit you, so keep that in mind, but you can capitalize on this by temporarily turning this fight into a 2v1 in your favor. That can be a lot of things to micromanage at once, but thankfully once you hit Phase 2, it goes back to being a one-on-one fight. You'll want to follow the same philosophy as Phase 1. Keep your distance and carefully pick your time to counterattack. You won't be able to follow up on every attack the boss does, so it's best not to try to. If you stay persistent, however, you will eventually reign victorious. After the Abyss Watchers, I decided to head back and do the Crystal Sage as well as Deacons of the Deep. I'm combining these two bosses into one section because, at this point in the run, neither one of them will require any in-depth strategies or major tips. If you defeated the Abyss Watchers, you should be pretty over-leveled for these fights. My main strategy for the Crystal Sage was to literally just rush the boss whenever they appeared and bash them with my shield. Whenever they teleport away, just keep doing that. After a few cycles, Phase 2 will begin, prompting the boss to spawn clones that each die in one hit. Clearing out the extra sages can be a little tedious, but it's worthwhile just to make sure they don't all attack you at once. After lots of running around and teleporting on the sages part, the boss goes down pretty easily, allowing us to run through Cathedral of the Deep. While I was there, I grabbed Lloyd's Sword Ring, which grants a 10% damage bonus so long as your HP is full. Another item you may want to pick up is the Spiked Shield, which has a higher than average attack value and can inflict bleed. This makes it a good choice for a shield only run. Just be aware that you can't parry with it, so you'll either need to equip a parry shield in your offhand or just do it with your bare hands. The Deacons fight was honestly incredibly tedious. The main problem lies in the fact that shields have incredibly low range and small hitboxes, meaning you can only hit 1 to 2 enemies at a time. Couple that with your low damage and this fight very quickly turns into a massive slog. This really becomes apparent in Phase 2 when you need to hit a specific Archdeacon. Since you don't have any form of crowd control, it's very difficult to get hits in without getting hit yourself. If you want to save yourself some time, I recommend bringing some alluring skulls. You may notice that I'm wearing armor. This is specifically for Phase 2 when the Deacons start casting Curse. If you're naked, it builds up incredibly fast, so if you want to avoid getting insta-killed, just throw on some Curse resistance. It may only buy you a couple more seconds, but sometimes that can be enough to either cancel the build-up or beat the boss altogether. Alright, that fight was kind of annoying, but thankfully the next boss isn't anywhere near as obnoxious. After a short run through the catacombs of Karthus, we find ourselves face to face with High Lord Wolnir. Ignore the item pickup and instead wrap around to his left hand. If you use R2s, you can break the bracelets in just 3 hits. Your mileage may vary depending on the shield you're using and what level it is. This is just what it took with my +4 round shield. Stick close to the hand you're currently attacking. I've found that if you go out in front of Wolnir, he has a higher chance of summoning either his sword or an army of skeletons. Once both shackles are broken, you'll want to employ a similar strategy with his right hand. Just play and move a lot more cautiously. If Wolnir decides to move and you're not ready to move with him, you will be caught in his miasma and it will kill you incredibly fast. So long as you play vigilant and cautious, Wolnir shouldn't be too big of an issue, especially when compared to the next boss. Pontiff took me over an hour of attempts when I streamed this run. And for good reason! He's very hard! But I'm gonna do my best to explain the strategies that worked and hopefully make it a little easier. I recommend parrying as much as you can in this fight, because doing so makes this boss very predictable. Every time you parry, Pontiff will follow up with one of 2 attacks. Most of the time, it'll be this sweeping stab, which you can punish with a hit of your own if you time it correctly. Occasionally though, he'll do another attack that you can parry, which leads to more free damage. The easiest attacks to parry are his opener and this sweeping slash, so be on the lookout for these attacks specifically. For phase 1, I recommend a very passive playstyle, staying at a medium range. Bosses like Pontiff have incredibly long, high damaging attack strings, so you'll want to minimize the amount of risks you have to take. You have to focus on survivability above all else, since you'll be fighting these bosses for much longer than you normally would. For phase 2, I highly recommend keeping his Phantom alive, as the boss will be far less aggressive when both are active. This gives you a lot more time to heal and distance yourself if need be. Another very important tip is to 2-hand your shield. If you do, you'll stagger the boss every 2 hits. This allows you to play much more aggressively in the second half, going for hits that would normally be a huge risk. But I still recommend that you play at a medium range. That way you can readily move to either an offensive or defensive position depending on what the boss does. If you give it lots of time and practice, you will eventually beat him. Afterwards, before heading up to the next boss, you'll want to save the souls that you got from Pontiff and grab the Easterner's Ashes. This ash will give you infinite large Titanite shards, bumping your shield from +4 all the way to +6. All things considered, Aldrich isn't too bad. The main thing to be concerned about is his damage, since he has a few attacks that can absolutely obliterate your health bar. The real dangerous ones are his teleport, the homing soul masses, his scythe spin, both versions of the bow attack, and the fire that spawns in phase 2. For both phases, you'll generally want to follow the same pattern. Try to stay around the center of the arena and rush him when he appears. If you do this, you can actually prevent Aldrich from using his bow attack altogether, since he's programmed to only use it when the player is at a specific range. Don't start attacking right away. Make sure you've dodged all the homing soul mass before getting your hits in. Try to stay as behind him as you can, since he has very few attacks that can hit you from there, and the ones that can are very well telegraphed. This lets you avoid his teleport AoE while still getting hits in. Phase 2 plays out very much the same as phase 1. Just make sure you're avoiding the fire that Aldrich leaves around the arena. It can deal massive damage to you if you're not careful. Do this for long enough, and Aldrich will go down no problem. Dancer might be a little tricky, but with the right strats, she's very doable. In phase 1, it's very important to stick to her right side, the one without a sword. Most of her attacks from this angle are well telegraphed, easy to dodge, and provide you with lots of room to punish. Just be on the lookout for her grab attack, it will most likely one-shot you. At the beginning of the second phase, she will always open up with this spin attack. To dodge it, all you have to do is run behind her and count the rotations. Most of the time, she ends the attack on the 7th spin, but I believe it can end as early as the 4th, so start dodging around that time just to be safe. During phase 2, you'll want to avoid being out in front of her as much as possible. If you can, stick to her backside, since this gives you ample time to dodge her attack strings while letting you get close enough to actually inflict damage. Since she has a lot of health and your DPS is low, you'll want to try to make the fight as short as possible. That way, she doesn't have as many opportunities to deal damage to you. She may take a few tries depending on your experience, but be patient and keep practicing and you'll eventually eventually get it down. After the fight, I did a quick run through Lothric Castle and the Consumed King's Garden. This was specifically for Titanite chunks, as I really wanted a +9 for the next boss, and I absolutely guarantee you will too. You didn't forget about Yhorm, did you? I hope not, since he's required to finish the game. You may be thinking that this fight will be next to impossible, but there are strategies that make him more than beatable without the Storm Ruler. And yes, that includes beating him with a dinky little shield. Yhorm's attacks are very rudimentary when compared to most of the bosses in this game. As a result, he's very easy to consistently dodge, which is good because we'll be fighting him for at least 10 minutes. Yhorm doesn't take much damage if you hit either his feet or his ankles, but there's two other parts of his body that are technically weak points: his hands and his head. He doesn't have very many attacks, but every single one leaves his hands vulnerable for a few seconds. You can only really hit the hands once after each attack, but very occasionally you can sneak in a second hit before he pulls away. If you hit the hands enough times, Yhorm will fall to the ground, leaving his head completely exposed. This is what you're after, as that's his most vulnerable body part. In Phase 2, he only gains one extra attack that you need to be wary of: the Jump Slam. It's easy enough to dodge, and he's not likely to do it unless you're far away, but it's good to keep in mind regardless. I recommend doing this fight with your camera unlocked. That way you can angle your shield for better hits on the hands. Remember, shields barely have any range at all, so you'll want to get as close as possible. You'll be fighting Yhorm for a long time, so strap in and focus. You'll eventually find that this big giant isn't so tough after all. Once again, I'm combining these two bosses into one segment because the advice I have for both is very similar. It's essentially fighting them as you normally would, just with a shield instead of an actual weapon. For Dragonslayer armor, you'll want to stay close and stay out in front. Simply being up close allows you to capitalize on this boss's extremely long punish windows. Not to mention, it staggers quite frequently, so long as you can consistently follow up on any attacks it whiffs. The main thing to be concerned about are its shield attacks, as they come out very quickly and can be hard to react to. During Phase 2, the Pilgrim Butterflies will start to fire projectiles at you from outside the arena. This would be annoying if not for the fact that there's an audio cue that plays before they do. If you're playing with headphones, that means you can also tell which direction they're coming from. Overall, not too bad a boss. At this point in the run, it mostly just comes down to how well your fundamentals are established rather than specific strategies. This extends to Lorien and Lothric as well. Same as the last fight, you're gonna want to stick to the boss like glue. Lorien's attacks have lots of end lag, giving you plenty of time to follow up after dodging. He also staggers fairly easily, allowing you to get in some extra counter hits every so often. Stay locked on and try to dodge towards his back. If he teleports away from you, simply run towards him, dodge when you're up close, and bam, you get a bunch of free damage. Phase 2 is a little trickier as you'll have to deal with Lothric firing magic at you. Teleports are also a lot more frequent. Keep dodging towards their back and try your best to hit both brothers at once. It's okay if you end up dealing more damage to Lorien, since if he dies, you'll have a lot of time to wail on Lothric pretty much for free. He's going to be your main target during this fight, since if he dies, they both die. This is gonna be a hard one. In fact, this is the boss that gave me the most trouble during the stream. I was feeling pretty exhausted after streaming the game for over 7 hours, so even when I eventually did beat the soul of Cinder, it was a pretty messy fight. This boss has 2 full phases and 5 different movesets, all of which range in difficulty. You'll need different strategies for each of these, so let's take a look at his opening moveset. This boss always starts with a straight sword. When he has this, his attacks vary widely in punishability. Some attacks will leave him wide open, while others will actually punish you if you try to attack afterwards. I recommend playing very carefully at a medium to close range. That way you can gauge which attacks he's doing and if you can follow up on them. Otherwise, try to stay away, as you really want to minimize the amount you'll have to dodge. The Mage moveset is by far the easiest one to deal with. Most of the attacks during this phase are either slow or ranged, so hug the boss as often as possible. Do this and you'll get lots of opportunities to deal damage. The attack you really want to be on the lookout for is when the boss uses Soul Stream. This spell has a massive amount of end lag and is typically your best opportunity for damage. Next is the Curved Sword / Pyromancy moveset. In my opinion, this is the most dangerous set of moves in the entire first phase. His attacks are constant, fast, and don't have very much downtime afterwards. I think you should try playing at a medium range, avoiding all of the boss's attacks and getting a hit in whenever you can. The final phase 1 moveset is the Lance, which is in my opinion the easiest to deal with. Attacks are very straightforward, often consisting of simple pokes and forward thrusts. There are a couple of miracles to watch out for, such as Wrath of Gods and Heal. You really do not want Heal, as your damage output is already incredibly slow, but if you get it, there's not much you can do about it. Play super close and get easy punishes. Simple as that. Make sure you're always keeping track of how many hits you've done. As in phase 1, he always staggers in 4 hits so long as you're two-handing. In phase 2, he has much less health, making it a tad easier than the first phase in my opinion. Like with the Lance in phase 1, you'll want to play close. He has a lot of attacks that are both easy to dodge and easy to follow up on. The Grab, the Grounded Lightning attack, and the Leaping Slash are a few examples. You'll have to dodge a lot during this phase, but I think his lack of health really offsets the risk of playing aggressively. He staggers every 5 hits, so once again, make sure you're keeping track of that in the back of your head. If you do, you'll be able to interrupt some of his attacks and get some free counter damage as well. After almost a full hour and a half of attempts, we finally beat the Soul of Cinder. The run was officially over. And you know what? It was a lot of fun. Doing Dark Souls challenge runs is a personal favorite hobby of mine. It's always a joy to take on these incredibly challenging games under increasingly ridiculous circumstances. And I hope this video has inspired at least someone to give this run a go. If you do, then good luck to you.